You know what's strange? Really strange? 2.5 million men volunteering to fight in a war, not for their country, not for their freedom, but for the empire that ruled them. It's 1939. India's under British control, has been for nearly 200 years. Gandhi's already leading massive protests. Millions of Indians want independence. They're demanding it. They're willing to go to jail for it. And then Hitler invades Poland. Britain declares war. And suddenly, without asking, without a vote, India's at war too. Because that's how empires work. Here's the thing that gets me. Over the next 6 years, India would send more volunteers to fight in World War II than Britain itself. Let that sink in. More than Britain. We're talking about 2.5 million Indian soldiers. The largest volunteer army in human history. But this isn't a typical war story. This is messier, more complicated. Because these men weren't fighting for India's freedom. They were fighting for Britain's. And back home, their own people were fighting Britain for independence. Talk about being caught in the middle. Let me take you back. India in the 1930s. It's not one India, really. It's hundreds of kingdoms, provinces, languages, religions, all under British rule. The Raj, they called it. The British ran everything that mattered. The economy, the military, the laws. Indians couldn't govern themselves, couldn't control their own resources. And it wasn't just political control. It was about dignity. British officers in whites-only clubs, signs saying, "Indians and dogs not allowed." A system designed to make you feel like a subject, not a citizen. Like a child who couldn't be trusted with adult responsibilities. Gandhi understood this. That's why by 1939 the independence movement had real momentum. Millions had marched, thousands had gone to jail. The dream of Swaraj, self-rule, it felt close. Maybe 5 years away, maybe 10, but close. Then September 19th, 39 happens. The Viceroy, Britain's man in India, announces India's at war. No debate, no consultation, just, you're at war now. And for a lot of Indian leaders, that was the final insult. We can't even decide if we go to war? The Indian National Congress, the main independence party, they were furious. Nehru said something like, "How can we fight fascism abroad when we're living under oppression at home?" It was a fair question. A really fair question. They demanded Britain promise independence after the war. Britain refused. So Congress told Indians, don't cooperate, don't volunteer, don't help the war effort. But here's where it gets complicated. Because millions of Indians didn't listen. They volunteered anyway. Why? Well, there's no single answer. India's huge, diverse. People had different reasons. Some believed in fighting fascism. They'd read about what Hitler was doing. Kristallnacht, the persecution of Jews, Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. To them, this was a war worth fighting. Evil had to be stopped. Others were more practical. The army paid. Not great, but steady. And in rural Punjab, in the villages of Nepal, in small towns across India, there weren't a lot of options. Farming barely fed your family. The army meant steady income. 3 meals a day, a pension if you survived. For poor families, that mattered a lot. Then you had the military tradition. The British Indian Army had regiments going back generations. Sikh regiments, Gorkha regiments, Rajput regiments. Fathers served, so sons served. Grandfathers served, so grandsons served. It was about honor, about proving yourself, about belonging to something bigger. And let's be honest, some men just wanted adventure. They'd never left their villages. The army meant seeing the world. Egypt, Italy, Burma. For a 19-year-old from a small town, that was pretty tempting. So they signed up, in huge numbers. By 1945, India had 2.5 million men in uniform, the largest volunteer army in history. Let me put that in perspective. America with twice India's population and way more wealth, had about 12 million in service. But only after a draft. India did it with volunteers. These men fought everywhere. And I mean everywhere. North Africa against Rommel's Afrika Korps. Italy, slowly grinding up the peninsula. The Middle East, protecting oil fields. Southeast Asia, in the jungle hell of Burma. Europe, helping liberate France and Italy. Take North Africa, 1940 to 1943. The Desert War. Indian divisions were crucial. The 4th Indian Division fought at Tobruk, at El Alamein, in the brutal back and forth across Libya and Egypt. They fought in heat that melted rubber, in sandstorms that stripped paint off vehicles. Or Italy, the Gothic Line, some of the toughest fighting of the war. Indian troops helped break through German defenses in the mountains. Bitter, close-quarters combat, village by village, hill by hill. The 8th Indian Division earned 5 Victoria Crosses in Italy. 5. That's Britain's highest military honor. But the worst, the absolute worst, was Burma. From 1942 to 1945, this was hell on earth. Dense jungle, monsoon rains, malaria, dysentery, Japanese soldiers who fought to the death. And in the middle of it all, Indian soldiers. The Japanese had invaded Burma, were threatening India itself. The British were in retreat, disorganized, panicking. It was Indian troops who held the line. At Imphal, at Kohima. These battles don't get enough attention, but they were massive. Some historians call them the Stalingrad of the East. At Kohima in 1944, Indian and British forces held a tiny perimeter against waves of Japanese attacks. For weeks, supplies running out, wounded piling up, men fighting with bayonets because they ran out of ammunition. The tennis court at the British Commissioner's residence became the front line. That's how close it was. Men dying over a patch of ground you could cross in 30 seconds. One Indian soldier, Havildar Gaje Gele, earned a Victoria Cross at Kohima. He single-handedly took out a Japanese machine gun position that was slaughtering his company, ran at it alone, under fire, took it out with grenades, saved his company. He was 27 years old. But yet we don't talk about enough. What was it like for these men, psychologically? You're fighting for Britain. Your officers are mostly British. They often treat you like you're inferior, make casual racist remarks, assume you're not as smart or capable. You prove yourself in battle again and again, and still get passed over for promotion because of your skin color. And back home? Your family's struggling. Maybe they support you, maybe they don't. Your neighbors might call you a traitor for serving the British. Gandhi's telling everyone who'll listen that the war is wrong, that Indians shouldn't fight. Meanwhile, you're in a trench in Italy. It's cold, you're hungry, German artillery's pounding your position, and you're thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I risking my life for people who won't even let me eat in their restaurants back in Delhi? Some Indian soldiers wrote letters home. The British censored them, but some survived. They're heartbreaking. One soldier wrote, "I fight because I must, but my heart is divided." Another wrote about the contradiction, fighting for freedom in Europe while India remained unfree. And then there's the other side, the Indian National Army, the INA, led by Subhas Chandra Bose. Now this is where the story gets really complicated. Bose was a nationalist leader, as committed to independence as Gandhi. But he didn't believe in non-violence. He believed India needed to fight for freedom, literally fight, with guns. When Japan invaded Southeast Asia in 1942, they captured thousands of Indian soldiers, British Indian Army soldiers, POWs in Singapore, Burma, Malaya. And Bose saw an opportunity. He approached the Japanese, made a deal. They'd support an Indian National Army that would fight alongside Japan against Britain. To the British, Bose was a traitor, a collaborator. He was working with the enemy, with fascists. But to many Indians, he was a hero. A man willing to make a deal with the devil to free India. Bose convinced tens of thousands of Indian POWs to switch sides, to join the INA. Think about that decision. You're a prisoner, conditions are brutal, the Japanese are known for treating POWs well. Bose offers you a way out, a chance to fight for India's freedom, not Britain's. What do? Many said yes. By 1945, the INA had about 40,000 men. They fought alongside the Japanese in Burma, trying to invade India from the east. At Imphal and Kohima, the very battles I mentioned earlier, you had Indian soldiers on both sides. British Indian Army versus Indian National Army. Brothers, sometimes literally, fighting each other. One story that haunts me: a soldier in the British Indian Army at Kohima defending the perimeter. He's in a trench, Japanese attack, but with them are INA soldiers, Indian soldiers. He hears them shouting in Hindi, in Punjabi, his languages, and he has to shoot them. Has to, or they'll kill him. What do you do with that? How do you make sense of it? You're all Indian, you all want freedom in some way, but you're on different sides of a battle. There's no clean answer here. No good guys and bad guys. Just men trying to survive, trying to do what they think is right. The INA offensive failed. By mid-1944, Japan was losing. The INA retreated with the Japanese back into Burma. Thousands died, from battle, from disease, from starvation. The dream of marching into Delhi as liberators never happened. Bose himself died in 1945, a plane crash in Taiwan, supposedly. Though some Indians never believed it, spent decades claiming he'd survived, was in hiding. That's how powerful his legend became. But here's the strange thing. After the war, when the British tried to court-martial INA officers for treason, all hell broke loose. Indians across the country protested. Even Congress, which had opposed Bose's methods, defended the INA. Because to many Indians, these men weren't traitors. They were patriots who took a different path. The British backed down, couldn't afford a rebellion, and many historians think this was the moment Britain realized they couldn't hold India anymore, that the loyalty they'd counted on was gone, that independence was inevitable. Meanwhile, the men of the British Indian Army came home. 2.5 million men returning to a country that didn't quite know what to make of them. Some were celebrated, families proud, villagers throwing feasts for returning soldiers, men who'd seen the world, fought Hitler and Tojo, coming back with stories and medals. But others, they came back to resentment, to people who saw them as collaborators, who asked, "Why did you fight for the British? Why did you help them?" And the men themselves were changed. They'd seen things, done things, watched friends die, killed people, lived through trauma that would haunt them forever. And they came back to an India on the verge of independence, but also on the verge of partition, of religious violence, of more death. By 1947, India was free, but divided. India and Pakistan. The partition killed maybe 1 million people. Millions more became refugees. And Indian soldiers, men who'd fought together in Burma and Italy, suddenly found themselves on opposite sides again. Indian Army versus Pakistani Army. The men who survived World War II and then survived partition, they carried something heavy, a knowledge of how complicated loyalty is, how there's rarely a simple right or wrong, how you can fight for something and against something at the same time. What I think about is this. Those 2.5 million men, they weren't a monolith. They weren't all heroes or all victims or all collaborators. They were individuals, each with their own reasons, their own doubts, their own stories. Some believed in the cause, fighting fascism was right, whatever Britain's faults. Others needed the money. Some wanted adventure. Some were following family tradition. Some joined the INA because they couldn't stomach fighting for Britain anymore. Some stayed loyal because they'd given their word. And you know what? All of those choices are human. All of them make sense if you really think about it. If you imagine being 20 years old in a colonized country, with the world at war, and someone asking you to pick a side. We talk about World War II as a fight between good and evil, and in many ways it was. Hitler needed to be stopped. The Holocaust was unimaginable evil. Japanese atrocities in Asia were horrific. But for Indian soldiers, it wasn't that simple, because they were fighting for a colonial power, a power that oppressed them. That doesn't make them wrong for fighting, but it doesn't make them simple heroes either. It makes them complicated, real, human. After the war, India got independence, but at a huge cost. Partitions, violence, economic devastation. And the soldiers, many got pensions, eventually. Many got forgotten. Their stories lost. Because India had new heroes. Gandhi, Nehru, the independence leaders. But lately, there's been a shift. More Indians are learning about the war contribution. Memorials being built, stories being told, families researching grandfathers who fought, because these men deserve to be remembered. They fought in Africa's deserts and Italy's mountains and Burma's jungles. They earned thousands of medals, including dozens of Victoria Crosses. They held the line when Britain was desperate. They helped defeat fascism. And they did it all while carrying an impossible contradiction, fighting for freedom while unfree, serving an empire while dreaming of independence, being told they were fighting for democracy while denied it at home. That takes something, courage, sure, but also a kind of stubborn hope, a belief that maybe somehow this sacrifice would mean something, that their service would earn respect, that India's contribution would be remembered. For decades, it wasn't. The West focused on its own stories. D-Day, the Battle of Britain, Stalingrad. All crucial battles, don't get me wrong. But the Burma campaign, North Africa's Indian divisions, they got footnotes. And in India, the focus was on independence, on Gandhi and non-violence and the freedom struggle. The soldiers became awkward, didn't fit the narrative of peaceful resistance. But history's messy. It doesn't fit narratives. India's World War II story is messy. It's about millions of men who made different choices in impossible circumstances. It's about courage and contradiction, loyalty and betrayal, service and sacrifice. There's a memorial in Indian Gate in Delhi. It lists the names of Indian soldiers who died in British wars, including World War II. Over 87,000 names. And that's just the dead. Doesn't count the wounded, the traumatized, the ones who came home carrying invisible scars. When I think about these men, I don't think about grand strategy or military campaigns. I think about individuals. A 19-year-old from Punjab in a trench in Italy. A Gorkha soldier in the Burmese jungle. A captured POW deciding whether to join the INA. These weren't abstract political choices. These were life and death decisions made by real people, sons and fathers and brothers, men who were scared and brave, and confused and determined. And their story matters, not just for India, for all of us, because it reminds us that war is complicated, loyalty is complicated, right and wrong aren't always clear. It reminds us that colonized people weren't just passive victims, they had agency. They made choices, sometimes difficult ones, sometimes contradictory ones. And it reminds us to look beyond the simple stories, the ones where everyone's a hero or everyone's a villain. Real history is more interesting than that, more human. India's World War II veterans are almost all gone now. The last few survivors are in their 90s, hundreds of years old if they're still with us. Soon, there won't be anyone left who remembers, who can tell us what it was really like. But we have their stories, letters, diaries, oral histories collected by researchers who understood these voices needed to be preserved, and we have a responsibility to remember, to tell their story, to grapple with its complexity instead of simplifying it. Because 2.5 million men fought in that war, the largest volunteer army in history, fighting for an empire that ruled them, hoping somehow that their service would matter, that their sacrifice would be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, if we tell their story right, we can honor that hope.